primary component there is intention. And
Mm-hmm.
we'll see where we can go with it. But I think it's intention.
Mm-hmm.
It's if the intent is to reset or reduce or clear out, and the result is not that,
Mm-hmm.
then what's the issue? And then we talked about meditation a
Mm-hmm.
lot. And really at the highest level of efficiency with that type of a practice is to be in a meditative state as much as possible. Being stoic, being just balanced,
Mm-hmm.
right? Being centered,
Mm-hmm.
right? Being neutral, being in
Mm-hmm.
neutrality. And so when I think about neutrality, there is a certain amount of clarity that needs to be present in order to maintain a neutral balance. It's almost like an environment, right?
Mm-hmm.
If our environment is chaotic and cluttered and haphazard, it's very hard to stay balanced mentally, emotionally, spiritually, period, in general, just because our nervous system responds to our environment. And so when I think about sleep versus rest, a lot of times we may be trying to look for productivity in life.
Mm-hmm.
And I was speaking with somebody recently about like battery life. We
Mm-hmm.
use that metaphor for people. I have my battery's low.
Yeah.
My battery's low. At the end of the day, my battery's low.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you do with your device to preserve its battery life?
Mm-hmm.
You clear out things, right? You reduce its activity level. And so when I think about sleep versus rest, we were talking about sleep apnea, and a lot of times people can intend to go to sleep. They intend to rest,
Right.
close their eyes, lay in the bed. But because what's going on with your nervous system in your body and your mind, you don't actually get rest.
Right.
You're in a sleep state, but
Yep.
you're not in a restful state, and you're not being restored. Right? You're not actually fully recharging your battery to its fullest capacity.
Right.
And I think a lot of it has to do with the environment and creating clarity in our environments. But how do we do that?
Yeah.
Right? How do we
Yeah.
get ourselves to a point to where we can maximize our energy levels throughout the day? Right? Because we're not putting ourselves in a position to where we're constantly overstimulated and overengaged. Because I think what happens is we're giving a lot of our energy to some things, but we're neglecting optimizing other areas of our life that we wish to also put energy and attention towards because of improper energy balancing, improper energy management,
Yeah.
improper ability to actually be in more of a restful state when we're not in a state of stimulation.
Right.
I think when we come down, our minds always are going, always are going. We got alerts, we got signals, we got different triggers, we got different alarms. We're responsive to our natural environment, and we've created an environment of doing. And a lot of people burn out.
Yeah.
And I think the dis-ease in not really being able to get back to a restful state after activity to completely recharge ourselves and to restore ourselves, I think the dis-ease is then identified or highlighted through the body as disease, right? As complications, as health problems. Because in order for a health problem to occur, something has to be off. There has to be an imbalance somewhere. It's like a diagnostic check. If this is broken, let's figure out the source.
Right.
Right. And so if we are now a race of people who are accustomed and starting to get used to managing diseases, what is the diagnostic check to figure out what is the root source? Are we properly restoring ourselves on a daily basis, or are we overrunning ourselves? Are we constantly intending to get rest, but we're not actually resting?
Right.
And so it's putting us in an unhealthy state of mind, unhealthy physical state, and just unhealthy state of being, period.
Right. Well, that a couple different things. So two things that will kind of go through our mind. One is the technology metaphor of our time and our energy, right? You mentioned battery.
Yep.
So as you said battery, and you thought about what other apps you got running in the background, and it made me think about you might be guilty of this too. I know I am of having Google Chrome open with 15 tabs.
Oh yeah.
Right. And I think that's a perfect metaphor. I think it's a perfect metaphor of activity, thoughts, bandwidth, computer cache, going on in the background
Mm-hmm.
within our processing system, our RAM, with these open tabs. And I think there's a lot of us that have way too many tabs open within our mind that's taking our energy behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's having apps open, sometimes it's having conversations and not being completely and utterly present where we are, right? So that to me is number one, is that what are the tabs you got to close out? You got to close out some tabs, right? There's just too many tabs going. It's affecting the processing power of your computer. You are a computer, and your processing power and your bandwidth is being affected by you having these useless tabs open on your Chrome browser. That's number one. Number two is using the metaphor that a person would go to a fitness coach and from a rest perspective, right? Someone that's in the fitness profession. Is it optimal to lift weights 7 days a week, right? Versus, well, no, I have a rest day. Okay, so if there's a fitness professional that says, hey, you'll actually get further by inserting these rest days into your regimen, right? There's a metaphor there. So how do we get the exact same thought process from a learning and the other skills in our lives?
Great point.
Right? So if you want to absorb academia and you have someone that's a professional academic, right? There's a lot of people right now that are putting down the collegiate system, and I have no problem either way, however they balance it, but there are people in academia that are lifelong academics. They figured out how to learn. No problem. But the question there is, what can you learn from people that know how to optimize learning? The same way is that, how do you learn how to optimize your physical capabilities by learning from someone who has optimized their physical capabilities? And what I would say is that 99% of the time, that person that's optimized their physical capabilities has what along the way? Rest days. So the same thought is where do we need to do the same within our work lives, within our professional lives, within our careers, within earning money, within spending time with our families? Is that you have someone that can get into that hustle culture. I'm going to hustle 7 days a week, and the unplugging of rest. At the end of the day, I think unplugging from that it doesn't have to be sitting around doing nothing. I think rest can just be something that rejuvenates. Let's take the word rest and let's insert the word rejuvenate. And I think if you figure out what rejuvenates you, that's a form of rest. So it could be going to nature. It could be going on a run. It's actually even a part of something I say, rest could be a run. A run can be rest. If it's allowing you to rest from your mind working, it allows you to unplug your mind, rest your mind, and activate your body. So again, I think we need to look a little bit deeper into what rest means and to realize what type of rest we need at what times. You need to rest your brain and you want to put on classical music and go for a run and your brain is completely turned off, you just rested.
Oh, yeah.
You rested by activating your body. Like, well, how does that work? It works in the fact that you've decided to turn that you've closed that tab and you've allowed yourself to focus on another tab, and vice versa. Where if your body doesn't need to stay active, there are people right now that that are so active, and I think we probably swung the other way, and people maybe not being as active as they could, would, or should be.
Right.
But there are people whose bodies are constantly being active, but it can be counterproductive. They need to take rest days. So if we look at the pillars of our lives and understanding, our intellectual stimulation, our physical stimulation, building ourselves into the best versions of ourselves, and that is our character, where are we getting the rest that we need, and how are we deciding, and what's the plan, right? And that's something that if you do look at the fitness industry, if you employ a expert, they create a plan for you with inserted rest days into what will help you get to where you want to go. And I'd argue that colleges do the same, right? What's their fitness plan? A syllabus. They got the syllabus in the beginning of the year, and they say, if you want to ingest, if you want to come out with this knowledge, here's the plan to get there. And this is the process along the way that we're going to quiz you and test your capabilities with rest inserted. And I think it's an interesting thought process. In those in the collegiate world, it's like personal training. They have a concept that you can learn, and you're following the syllabus. The exact same thing,
Mm-hmm.
with rest days included. So the question is, where do you need to intentionally insert rest into your life, and where are you resting too much in other parts of your life?
Right.
Right. Let's just not all swing one way and think we're all working 7 days a week, 364 days a year with 1 day off. Right. We're not doing that. So the question is that what's the plan to be able to help you balance your work and rest to be able to turn off? And lastly, it's also what the hell was I going to say? I don't know. I lost my last point, but if you can figure out what balance of rest versus work, chances are you'll be able to be a little bit more successful. Oh, here's the last thing I was going to say was, when you figure out where you need to put in rest, and then it made me think of another R word, which is ritual. So what rituals are you putting in place when you need to rest? It might sound silly to some. At the same time, it's very interesting, right? If you have a ritual every night, and you know it's time to rest, right? I'm going to have this tea. I'm going to have this candle. I'm going to do all these other things. That becomes a part of your ritual. And I think it's an interesting concept that not enough people talk about, having rituals around your rest. And if you do that, it allows you to get back into that rest state faster and to be able to pop out better, right? Because you mentioned earlier, it's like, listen, I got sleep, but no, I got good rest.
Right.
And what was it that allowed you to get that good rest? And then how do you try and replicate that as much as possible? Well, having caffeine this close to going to bed doesn't help me get the rest that I need. So I think part of that is the ritual side of things, without getting too, woo about it. I think there's definitely ways to build that and develop that out so you can get yourself into that zone, that state. Right? Like when we go to work out, it's like, what rituals do we need to do before we work out to optimize that workout? And I think the same thing applies. What do you need to do in order to optimize your rest?
Big time.
Whether it be the environment, notifications, in the same way that what rituals are we doing when we walk into the gym, when we roll out for a little bit, might get the massage gun, might do a couple of things. That's going to help with the rituals that allow us to get into the state to optimize our time. And I think it's the same metaphor.
No, 100%. I agree with everything you said, and that just sparked a page full of points. And I like to solve problems in my mind, and it's one thing that just the way that my brain works is always the why behind the what and the how. It's like, okay, so what does it mean? And I think it's really cool, the perspective of sleep and rest, because you don't have to sleep that long to get good rest. You know what I'm saying? And a lot of times, some people operate on less sleep as others. And I think it directly correlates to the amount of stimulation that you're under throughout your day. And I bring this metaphor because I try to explain it clearly to anyone I'm speaking to, just about at nighttime, how to put yourself in a restful state and why it's important to do so. When I'm coaching clients about how important proper sleeping habits are to regulating body weight and the emotional health that's important in order to sustain and support proper physical health, right? And mental health and everything. I tell them, I said, hey, think about a computer, right? We used to have those old computers with the motherboard and all that type of stuff. And you go and turn the computer off, but it's still doing what? It's still humming.
Yep.
And the more that we have going on, the more those tabs that are open, the slower the computer is moving. Right? And now we're moving on to more tasks and more other things we're trying to do with the device, and it's just moving at a smaller pace because it's trying to maintain so many things at once, trying to keep so many tabs open. It's trying to, multitasking here and doing this here and doing that there. And so there's a few things about, it's one thing to say, okay, we need to rest more. I think everybody understands that, but how? Because then that's the next question is, well, how do we do it, right? And it made me think about controlling the controllables, in the fact of a lot of teachings say that one way to release a lot of those tabs are identifying which tabs are within your control and which aren't. Right? A lot of times we can get pent up holding on to things that we have no ability to change, alter, or adjust. And they're saying that is a waste of your energy to continue to focus on that. Close that tab. There's nothing that you thinking about it or you dwelling about it or you talking about it can do to change it. So close the tab. Whatever's going to happen with that, it's going to happen. You can revisit it when that time comes, but it doesn't need your energy and your attention any longer, right? So controlling the controllables. And one way to look at controlling the controllables, that's why people of religion generally they project a standard of peace and serenity, right? The closer you are in religion, doesn't mean your life changes, right? Doesn't mean your life changes. You may still have the same hardships, the same challenges, the same hurdles as everybody else, physically, in the physical realm. But religiously, when you attach your spirit to something greater, it helps you release control over those things you can't control, because you understand that there is a greater source. The buck doesn't stop with you, right? If it's too overwhelming for you to handle or you don't have the answers, that's okay, because at the end of the day, you have a higher source that is, you can delegate it up to. Hey, I don't know what to do with this, Lord. Can you handle it for me? Can you? I trust you. Whatever happens, happens. That helps people then breathe easy and release, their projected outcome of their career, their job, their relationship, whatever's going on. They can release that for the moment so they can have that rest that they need to think more optimally. It also made me think about gratitude. That's another way to signal yourself from closing some of those tabs, right? Tabs of grief, tabs of sadness, tabs of fear, tabs of anxiety, tabs of worry, tabs of whatever. You can put yourself in a state of gratitude.
Yep.
Now you can close some of those tabs, boom, so we can get back to that neutral state so we can be more restful. And then it made me think about journaling. You can get stuff out of the head. This is one thing that I need to do more. I would do good with writing things down, but I use too many sources. So now I have to continue. I wrote it down, but I have to keep the tab open because I have to remember that I wrote it down in that notebook. And then I got my other things I wrote down on that notebook. And then this was in my phone journal, and this was a random sheet of paper on my desk. And so journaling and having a set place, which made me think about what you mentioned, that too, Trello. I've heard other people mention it too. It's such a good source because you can get stuff out of your mind. And now you can help yourself be more in a restful state throughout your day to do what? Optimize your energy, maximize your battery life throughout the day. So we don't have to go and then put other stuff in us to crank our expenditure up. Caffeine cranks up our expenditure, right? Any external energy source cranks up our energy expenditure artificially. And so we think that we got this energy, but we don't. We're really extremely tired. We're extremely under rested, right? Calendar is another one. And then, lastly, it made me believe like we almost need to highlight the importance of learning how to do something that seems so natural. And I think maybe some people may shy away. You have other people who implement these practices and behaviors, and they may have reached a point of more balance through their life, and they're generally higher achievers because they understand how important it is to reset, restore, rest, to manage that energy through the day, to get those tasks done consistently, to stay consistent, because they know that's the only thing that's going to move the needle. And so we see these behaviors of people who generally are higher achievers about what they do to rest, relax, meditate, whatever it is, mantra, rituals. But do we understand why it's necessary? And I think it's because we have to understand that now we're creating an environment that we're not built for. And I think once we understand that it is a problem, then the average person who doesn't get it will then see it is necessary to seek an answer. But if we don't identify a problem, we're not going to look for the answer. And the problem is we have to understand all these buildings, all these lights, all of these devices, all of this technology, we're not built for this. We're built for trees, wind, the sun, water. We're not built for all of this. And so whether or not we want to adopt or believe the understanding that our senses are so much stronger than our vision and our smell, it's so much stronger from our hair to our skin. We sense everything with a whole entire body. We have a complete sensory system. And so when we have created an ecosystem and an environment of frequencies, of energy dynamics, and we think that we're not affected, or we're not going to have to conform to what that is. And so we have to understand that we're not ever in a restful state, ever here, right? Not only until you go on a retreat. That's why they say do grounding techniques, right? Get in some grass, right? Meditate, calm it down. Everything about being healthy starts with getting back to that neutrality. Get yourself in a position where you can be calm. Turn off the TV, turn off the noise, turn this off. But now I notice on my phone, I can't even turn it off. You try to turn it off, it's still on. You go to sleep with the phone next to your bed, guess what? You got these vibrations. It's not bad. We love it. I love technology. I love the TV. I love my phone. But I don't like the fact that it affects my ability to rest my best at night. Right? They say get the phone out of your room, get the TV out of your room, right? Close the blinds so you don't have the light shining in your face, right? All these type of things to try to put yourself, to try to detach away from the stimulated frequencies that we have now consumed our whole entire environment with. And so it's extremely important, this conversation, to highlight and to implement through rituals behaviors of resting and detaching away from the noise, because the noise is what keeps us outside of neutrality, what keeps us off balance, and what hyper drains that battery behind the scenes, and we don't understand. Just charge it up. What's going on? Did you look in your open tabs on the internet? Do you have 68 still open? From 4 months ago when you were looking at whatever on the website. That is affecting your battery, what you got running behind the scenes. And so I think a good rule of thumbs is, in order to get more restful, and so we can optimize our ability to maintain our energy, to stay consistent with the things that we want to do in life and the things that make us feel, like we're living the most alive, is maximizing your rest. You're absolutely right. If you want to build a great body, you have to have a great practice of being rested. You have to go to sleep. You have to build in those days where you let your muscles rebuild and repair and restore, because that's where the strength is. The strength ain't in the breaking down.
So that exact same metaphor can go across to anything. Learning, right? It can go across to developing any skill, having the plan in place, including rest.
For sure.
Right? I mean, if someone's in college, I mean, they don't go to class 7 days a week. They go to class once a week, right? They have an assignment once a week, right? They're not in the same class 6 days a week. Oh, we're going to go to this class 6 days a week, even though it's 20 minutes a day. No, we're going to go once a week for an hour and a half information gathering, and then you need to rest the other days and the other times around it. I know it's a huge lesson that I need to learn.
Me too.
In how to have better rest. What rituals am I putting into place to maximize rest, and not only sleep but rest. And because we live in such an overstimulated society, and we do it to ourselves, we're all guilty of this, right? This is not pointing the finger at culture and blaming culture and saying, look what culture has made us into.
Right.
Culture is responding to supply and demand. Period, end of story. Culture responds to supply and demand. So if they supply something that it turns out that there's demand for it, whether it be entertainment, whether it be tools that make life easier rather than better. I think a lot of technology tools are sold to us that they make your life better, they make your life better, but in fact they just make your life easier. And then in the theory there is that if it makes it easier, it makes it better. But in the long run, is that really going to make your life better? I don't know the answer, right? Because it's really making it easier. If you have an entire generation that uses and leverages Uber Eats because it makes their life easier, in the long run, is that going to make their life better? And them not knowing how to cook for themselves, not understanding nutrition, or not understanding some of the basics that go into food preparation. So is that going to make your life better, or did you take ease and not develop a skill that was necessary? Right? I don't know how accurate it is, but there's always this saying, not always, but it's been now, it's been kind of thrown around that young kids don't even learn how to write cursive anymore, or spell check. Look, I catch myself all the time. Ever go to spell a word and it just gives it to you now? But if you're writing something down, right? If you grew up without spell check, but if you've grown up and all you know is Grammarly and all you know is spell check, is your life going to be better? Are you going to develop the skills necessary to be a better writer if you just have to write something down and then click and it corrects it for you?
Mm-hmm.
It's making your life easier. I agree with that, but is it making it better in the long run? That's open to interpretation. So with a lot of the technologies that are out there to make our lives easier, or they sell to make our lives better, but they're really making our lives easier. So culture just responds to supply and demand. Culture is just going to keep putting things out there that if the demand is there for, they'll continue to produce it, right? We can criticize novelty boxing matches, and we can criticize, the circuses that are out there. We can criticize people that devote 10, 20 hours a week to their fantasy football teams.
Mm-hmm.
We can criticize that all we want. Culture is just responding to supply and demand. So, right? I mean,
yes, you're right.
If there was no
fantasy football, what got me, I was like, yeah,
that makes sense, right?
Makes a lot of sense.
I mean, but you have all these leagues that are created, and
for real,
everything is just supply and demand. So, if there was a celebrity boxing match, but they didn't sell out the tickets, guess what? That's never going to happen again. If the viewership wasn't there, guess what? That's never going to happen again. Right. It has to be that supply and demand thought process, and realizing that, look, if the demand's not there, you cannot complain about the supply. It's like the argument of like the WNBA not earning what the NBA does. The demand isn't there. The demand is not there to be able to create the revenue to be able to garner the wages that it does in the NBA. It's just a fact, right? It's just a fact. So culture is responding to supply and demand. Culture is moving more towards ease than it is towards character. I think that's something that we don't hear enough of, is the idea of a person's character, or teaching young boys and girls about character above all, because money can come, money can go, but your character is something that you can't have taken away. Big time. I think there's a lot of lessons there. I think we can adapt to culture, we can complain about culture, or we can actually, you know what? I think it's about adapting. I think we can really adapt to the culture around us. And if we do that, then we're able to make the best of the culture based on the kind of animal that we are, right? I mean, and we can adjust by going to the culture that fits us the best, right? If a loud, aggressive culture or a loud, aggressive environment is not one that you thrive in as the type of animal you are, don't move to New York City. Don't do it. Don't do it. If you have to adapt to the culture while you're there, but understand that you might not be achieving your capacity because of the environment.
Right.
And then, look, I'm not trying to, I grew up in New York, and I'm not trying to, pick on New York. The same could be about a lot of towns, like LA, San Diego has a little more of a laid back vibe.
Super laid back.
Yeah. So if that doesn't work for your personality and where you get along with best, you're not going to get along with the culture. Are you going to go to San Diego and try to get it to be a different culture? Absolutely not. It's just not going to work. And you're going to waste your energy. You're going to have too many tabs open to be able to try and shift the tide. So therein lies one of the problems we have right now. This current culture is a tide that is going to be very hard to fight against in another 5 or 10 years. And it's not going anywhere. We could all look at the tide. Oh man, look what the tide's doing to the shoreline. Like, it's not going to stop. It's not going to stop. So I mean, what can we do? My response is, I'm going to be on land. I'm going to build my house. I'm going to put a little gate around it. That's it. That's all I'm concerned about right now. I'm not trying to change culture. I'm not trying to shift culture. I'm trying to study culture, become aware of culture, and realize what I need to do to be successful in the current culture.
For sure.
How do I adapt to be successful in this current culture? And, not try and play savior to the culture, not try and play savior to those caught up in the culture, and not try and think that I have the authority to change the culture. Right? Because then, again, that goes back to what we were talking about earlier, which was authority and responsibility. So if we're going to take responsibility of something, we have to have a certain degree of authority over it. Right? So if it's a school project that someone's leading,
Yeah.
It's like, great, I'll take the responsibility to lead the project. Because of that, I have to have a certain degree of authority within the group. That's the whole point. Like, what's the point of having a captain on the football team?
Right.
They have to have a certain degree of authority over the team, or because they've taken the responsibility. Yeah, you know what? I want to be the offensive captain. I want to be the captain of the defense. Okay. With that comes these responsibilities. Do you want it? Be like, yes. And everyone else would voted in or whatever the process might be. No problem. Here are the responsibilities, but with responsibilities should come a certain amount of authority over what you have responsibility for.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the biggest challenges in our culture right now, is people taking responsibility for who they are and where they are, and on top of that, having the authority over themselves to be able to say, this is what's going to happen, this is what's not going to happen, building their mini kingdom and saying, I have authority of what comes in these gates.
Mm.
And if you don't like it, no problem. But then I don't have the responsibility to take care of you, right? You have children and you have the responsibility to provide for them. You have to have a degree of authority. That's where I think culture has made some negative shifts, is taking away the authority of people within themselves and taking away the dominion of people in themselves, and the amount of authority that people have, let's say within their own families. You see what I'm saying?
Big time.
It's that dynamic of take responsibility. If you have responsibility over something, you have to have a certain degree of authority, or who's to say you should have the responsibility of it?
When you 100%, I got quite a few points out of that, and it makes me think about authority and leadership, and what makes someone an authoritative figure, and what makes you a leader. And you mentioned easier versus better, kind of transitioning from the previous topic of technology and things that we lean on, is everything that's easier isn't always better. And I think that the fueling source behind the creativity of making new things and evolving technology is all about, like, how can we advance the ability to get something done easier, or how can we make it more efficient, right? How can we create something to do it? And it doesn't equal better. It almost creates a slight of a dependency, because I was thinking about Grammarly and a lot of these tools that we use, and a lot of times these kids now, you'll hear them talking, oh man, yeah, I turned my assignment, and I was in the sauna the other day and I heard some kids talking about they turned an assignment in using AI. Mm-hmm. And it was like, oh man, I got a 91 on it. I mean, we had our things. They weren't as sophisticated as AI, but we had our things, Cliff Notes, all kind of stuff, right, that we tried to use to get around the system. But the more that we become dependent on those things, now the less that we're going to have the ability to leverage the tool or the benefit of knowing how to do that task. And when it comes to outsourcing for writing, outsourcing for cooking, outsourcing for everything, we're going to get to the point where we're not going to know how to do nothing. And if we don't know how to do it, we haven't learned how to do it, we haven't gone through the paces and the hardships of trial and error, doing well, failing through how to do it, now we're dependent. And so the moment that tool that we're using to handle the responsibility is gone, we no longer know what to do. Now you're starting from ground zero, right? And so it's going to create a dependency, and which is not good. So it makes me think about a quote or a statement that I heard just consuming information. Somebody said it. They were saying that the amount of success that somebody achieves is generally always directly correlated to the amount of adversity that they've experienced. And they're looking at like levels. If you want to be this great, you're going to have to endure this amount.
Yeah.
If you want to be this great, you're going to endure this amount. But the level of greatness that you want to achieve, you have to then equally be ready to handle the responsibility of dealing with the adversity, which is going to mold you into the person that can handle that. Now, when I think about leadership, responsibility, adversity, all those type of things that come with being appointed as someone who's going to be taking charge, going to be influential, I think boundaries. we have to have good boundaries. I think that's a great word to throw into the mix of this conversation. Boundaries on technology and devices, boundaries on what we outsource, boundaries on what we allow. And if you want to be responsible and take the leadership and you want to have that role to maintain or whatever it is, you're going to have to be the boundary drill sergeant, right? You think about the leader of a household. Why are they respected as a leader? Because they enforce boundaries. You think about the leader of any organization or anything you do in life, it enforces boundaries,
Yep.
right? And that's another thing you said previously about the game. The goal of life shouldn't be to be happy. You know, it's not a happiness game, right? You're saying that's more like a power thing, right? But when you think about it, nobody is happy with the person that's enforcing boundaries. Nobody's happy with them. And so almost taking the responsibility over your own life and over and taking that authority over your own life as well as the things around you is being willing to not please everyone, right? More so it's the pleasing of yourself. This is what's best for me. And everyone that is invested in the best of me will benefit from me doing what's best for me. And so the only people who I'm conflicting by doing what's best for me are those who are outside of my boundary level, my boundary lines. And so I should not really be overly concerned with those individuals or those things. I should understand clearly what is best for me, what is best for those who are invested in me being the best of me, and then let me create those appropriate boundaries, but then not always waiting for someone else to enforce. Understanding that we have the power to enforce. And it doesn't mean that you're always going to have to do what equals easier. Sometimes you have to be willing to make the tough decision for the things that are going to make you better. A cold plunge ain't easy. I've had to do it many a times as an athlete in my life, and still I try to implement it now as much as I can. It ain't easy. We don't do it because it's easy, but it makes you better. And a lot of this stuff with human and the technological aspect that we were referencing in the beginning of the conversation, I think what we're trying to do is evolve into what we have created versus create things that support us being better humans, that make our foundational experience of what we are better, but not always easy.
Not easy. And a couple things. So boundaries, when you mention that. When we think boundaries, one of the things that comes to the mind is a boundary of letting people in, of allowing people of what they can and can't do. And then I'd even take it to another horizontal step to it that says it's setting boundaries within yourself of the behavior of yourself to yourself you're willing to accept.
As a leader of yourself.
Correct. Until you have authority over yourself, when you take the responsibility of your own life and you have the authority over your life, you put boundaries on your attention that you're giving your attention to, things you're paying attention to, right? So that has to be number one. If I have a pocket full of money, but I'm paying that money out to things that aren't paying me back, that I'm not getting value from, right? Again, and I happen to not be a fan of fantasy football. I think that's a person taking money out of their pocket and they're paying that time for that form of entertainment. Cool, but that amount of time you're paying to be able to get that entertainment, to be able to get that competitiveness. That's the dopamine rush they're getting from it. The idea of competing against those that are in the league, be able to watching it a dopamine field because they're competing on the field, which then puts points in your bucket. And if you do that, you can potentially win. That's all it comes down to. And I think it's very natural. The idea of the feelings that are created by fantasy football leagues, I think are extremely healthy for men, especially. I think they're very healthy. I think it's very healthy for that competitive fire to continue to be flamed for the rest of your life. I completely agree with that. I would just also say is that could that same energy and that same feeling be towards you building a sick family? You know what I mean? You building an incredible family, you building an incredible career, you making yourself into that next level person.
That
That's all I'm saying. Is that if you're
That
taking
part.
the coal or the wood and you're putting the wood into that fire, my only question is, could that wood go into another fire? That's all I'm saying. Do I think it's a bad thing to have a burning desire for competition? No. Do I think it's a bad thing to want to win in general? Absolutely not. But the question is where are you putting that wood to be able to burn that fire for you to get the sensation of warmth of winning and the warmth of competing? So again, it's not being critical. It's just saying until you take authority of yourself and until you give yourself those boundaries is then when you're going to be better at establishing boundaries on those and with those that you have responsibility for because you have a certain degree of authority with them. And if you can do that, but that's a lot of the problem. If you try and get authority, or if you try and have someone impose boundaries or authority over you and they're out of shape, the message goes on deaf ears, right? So it's that same thought process, right? So it's, you meet someone, well, listen,
they don't have healthy boundaries.
I have a degree in kinesiology and health management, and I understand every facet of a muscle. And I know that, and you're looking at that person like, okay, so there are a few physicians, doctors, and they're outside the hospital smoking cigarettes.
Man.
Right? You're like, well, wait a second, what am I missing here?
Right.
Right. And they have a less degree of authority, most likely, because you're looking at them, because they don't have that authority in their life. They don't have that boundary in their life. No harm, no foul. Let them live their life. But because of that, you may or may not have authority over the decisions that I make. And that's something that as soon as someone owns, to say, look, the sooner you're able to grab hold of that and say, you might look and say, why do all of these people have authority over me? It's because I haven't taken the authority in my life, right? If you have a 9-to-5 job, someone or more than one person has authority over you. Why did they have authority over you? Well, maybe you haven't put in the work to be able to not have someone that has authority over you for you to be able to make those decisions on your own. You're like, oh, well, because it's not the best feeling. You want authority over yourself, take the responsibility and do what needs to be done in order to get to that point, right? And it's not an easy conversation to have with yourself, but I think once you have that conversation, it's a game changer. It's an absolute game changer. So the question is, where are we taking responsibility in our lives to be able to have authority over ourselves before we can have authority over anybody else? But when that authority is there, understanding that boundaries are necessary with other people, to ourselves, and boundaries maybe in their behavior with themselves or wherever you have the authority. So if you have a house and you got it gated and everything, like, listen, this is my home. I'm the authority here. I'm asking you to remove your shoes. I have the authority to not allow you to come in. Right. But if it's not your house, you haven't earned it. You haven't, you haven't bought the property. You're not paying the light bill. You don't have authority. So I think a lot of it has to do with that. And again, I think there's a lot of human nature cues that a lot of people, me included, I wasn't taking into consideration growing up. It's just, no, it's all right. Like, try your best and this and that. No, this is a highly competitive world. And you need to continue to build yourself into a character that is capable of being able to lift that weight. Right? You mentioned something before, right, of like being capable of the person that's been through more adversity and through more hardship has achieved more. Okay. Right. They have bigger muscles. Right. They've had to tear themselves down more. They may or may not have been faced with different boulders in the road. Right. In lifting those boulders gave them boulder muscles. That's why I think they call it a boulder. Makes you bolder. Right. Their path was just littered with adversity. Their path just had boulder after boulder after boulder. They had to move them. They had to figure this out. How do I move this boulder? It weighs this. Well, wait a second. Turns out there's a little pebble right here on this side of the boulder. And if I just move that pebble, because of it'll roll. Instead of, no, I'm going to take this sledgehammer and I'm going to break the boulder into smaller movable pieces.
They learn how to work smarter.
Correct. Because they've seen other boulders before. They've learned from other people that have come across boulders before. That's the ultimate hack. The ultimate hack is by learning from other people that have already experienced boulders.
Big time.
With biographies, and say to themselves, all right, I have this boulder here. Who else has faced this type of boulder? Do I have the right mentors in my life? Do I have the right team of wolves in my life? Do I have the right pack that if I need to call them, then they know how to help me? But you know what? There's no other things. We just got to move this. We need sheer strength to move this, right? Versus it's like, oh, listen, I've done this exact boulder. What kind of rock is it? Oh, is graphite? Oh, all right. Well, here, this is how graphite works. And as it turns out, if you get this rock to a certain temperature and then you hit it at this angle, it shatters. Have you ever seen the glass shatter?
Yeah.
You know, when you see a car window, you take a spark plug and you just go bing, the whole thing just shatters, right? Or you could just keep punching it with your fist because you think, well, I can break it, it's just glass. Or you could take a little spark plug, right, because of the porcelain that's on the end, and boop, and pop it right out, right? But if we didn't learn that in some capacity, we wouldn't know to do it.
Facts.
Same as with life. Now, that person that has experienced more adversity, which is stronger, and I'd even say better at life, right? It's like interesting is that life is a game, and there are people that are better at life and others that aren't as good at life.
Right.
Right? There's an old saying that says, it's one thing to be a good man, but it's another thing to be good at being a man. And that's interesting, right? Because it's like, well, he's a good man.
Right.
Got it. He's never done anything
That's true.
with his life. But he's a good man.
Right.
He's a good man.
Right.
But he's never done anything. He's never accomplished anything. Right? He never built anything. So, or you might have someone that he's good at being a man, but they might criticize and be like, but he's not a good man. Like, all right. That's open to debate.
No, it depends on the definition.
That's open to debate because what does it mean to be a good man?
Right.
You know what I mean? It's an abstract concept.
Right.
So that's when it kind of gets into place because I think the vast majority of people, if you went on the street and said, are you a good person? 99% of the population would say yes.
Right.
Right. It's like kind of going around and be like, are you an average driver, above average driver?
Right.
80% of the population is above average. Really?
Really?
Is that how this works?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no below average.
Right.
No one would say, maybe 5% of the population would say they're below average. But the whole point of below average means there's 50% of the population that are below average. But again, that's the metaphor behind it, right? It's that something I think we should be teaching young men, and we need to continually learn for ourselves. I know I need to learn it on a daily basis. Is okay. What is it? What do I need to do to be good at being a man? Because to be good at being a man could also mean engaging aggression, could mean engaging stoicism, could mean engaging patience, could mean engaging boldness. When someone would say boldness and patience are on the opposite sides of the spectrum, right? So if we get caught up too much in the narrative that just be patient, we might not be bold when we're supposed to be bold. And if we say we need to be bold, we might lose in the opportunity of when we need to be patient. That's the lesson we need to learn, is that all of those components are tools into being good at being a man. It's not just single note, right? So we can get into a meditative state, into a neutral state. A neutral state is the best state to be in because if we need to go in reverse, clutch, reverse, we're in reverse.
Right.
Clutch, go. Park, park. Right? It allows us to get to those three decisions quicker.
Oh yeah.
And if we're already rolling, what are we able to do? We're able to pop it into third real quick, aren't we? But you can't go from neutral standstill to third gear.
Right.
But if you're rolling, anyone that knows how to drive stick, all right, cool. Put it into neutral, you're just cruising at 25 miles an hour. You're coming around a curve, you might pop the clutch down into third, you're taking the turn. Same metaphor of life. Are we staying neutral, but also realizing that there's a lot of different behaviors that are necessary to be good at being a man? And I think there's a narrative out there to say, to be a good man, this is what a good man is. And, you have to be nice and you have to be chivalrous. you have to be a gentleman. And I say, that's not always the answer. It's not always the answer to be a gentleman, because you can't be a gentleman to savages. In the same way, you can't be a savage to gentlemen.
And the whole goal is surviving.
The whole goal is survival, right? And the whole goal is optimizing your time here, right? Surviving and building something that you have authority over, right? The word dominion. So if our objective in our short time on this planet is to have dominion over something and have authority over something, that authority and dominion, that's the goal. And in order to do that, what are the skills that we need to learn to be good at being a man that has authority, that has dominion?
Right.
Because at the same time, there are countless examples of people that have come into authority, which with it comes a degree of power that has corrupted them. And here's an example.
They didn't have appropriate boundaries.
They didn't have appropriate boundaries, and they couldn't handle it. Maybe they never had the right checks and balances.
Right.
Maybe they didn't have the right ethics code. Maybe they didn't have the right character. Right. So it's like, that's why the character is the most important, because then all of a sudden, then they got all this, like, well, you were in shape until you had the keys to the grocery store.
Right.
Then when you had the keys to your grocery store, all of a sudden you're overeating. What's going on? Where's that character that earned the way to authority? Look, a prime example is responsibility, authority, and power, right? With authority comes power, right? Those are interchangeable. So let's just say, as an example, the responsibility of keeping a safe society is given to the police. That's their responsibility, right? They're employed. We contribute taxes to go into this bucket that will allow them to compensate professionals to have the responsibility of a safe neighborhood. If we didn't have a safe neighborhood, who do we go to? We'd go to the police, say, what's going on? It was your responsibility to keep the neighborhood safe.
True.
Right?
To give them the authority.
Correct. They've taken the responsibility by getting that job. Because of that, we've given away a degree of authority. Right. We have. Yeah. That's what it is. And it has to be understood. That is an authority figure when it comes to that situation. But then the question is there a certain amount or a degree of people that have experienced that authority and abused the authority and have got a taste of the power and abused the power? Of course. But that comes in any profession. That comes in any degree of authority and power. It's just a metaphor to say, the responsibility of keeping a neighborhood safe is, at the same time, if you were in a distressful situation, you would call them and say, you have the responsibility to come and protect me. You have the responsibility to come, come fight the fire because my house is on fire. Right? That's your responsibility. In fact, we pay you to do that. It's your responsibility. But with that responsibility comes a degree of authority that we've given up in order to create this society that we deem as more beneficial to those of us that are in it. Right. If parents want to, give, people that have their children go to the public school system, right? They're giving that responsibility of teaching their kids
and influencing
their kids. Exactly. So now those teachers have a certain degree of authority, and administrators have a certain degree of authority over your children. It's just is what it is.
It is what it is.
It's a fact. And because of that, now, are there bad? Of course there are. There are just as many bad teachers as there are bad cops. There's just as many bad nurses as there are bad cops. Right. There's just as many bad. It's a Pareto's principle. There's just as many good and just as many bad in every single profession. So the question there is that where in our lives are we taking the responsibility to have authority over our own lives with the goal of having dominion over something that we have authority of, starting with ourselves and then something around it, whether it be you want to have authority over a business that you built, you want to have authority over a family that you built, the exact same thing. But until we take that, develop the boundaries internally that build us into having the strength based on the adversity that we come through to make us stronger, so that as we get down the road and be like, wow, you know what, you have big muscles, I want those. Well, what a coincidence. The person that has gone through the most adversity happens to have the biggest muscles. Pretty reasonable interpretation.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
This person had the most because they decided this was the adversity and they got under the bar. They got under the bar. They could have not gotten under the bar, but they got under the bar. They could have stopped. They could have turned around, but they kept going down the road.
They didn't outsource the responsibility.
And they said, here's this boulder in the way.
Facts.
And what do I need to do to get past this boulder? Right? Because now you're going to have the person that learned that the only way to get through the boulder was with a sledgehammer. They're not going to get that far down the road because they're going to be exhausted. And they're going to eventually get to a boulder that can't be just broken down with a sledgehammer. That's when they're going to need to have had the team to come around. But 3 people with sledgehammers could destroy it pretty quickly.
Yep.
Right? So it's that wisdom that you get along the way that helps you, the wisdom that you gain from the adversity that helps you have those muscles down the road. 100%. And then one last thing would then be, you mentioned about ease of use of tools, right? It's like easier versus better. And we're all guilty of protein shakes.
Oh, yeah.
Right? We're all guilty of supplements.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So we're all there, right? I mean, none of us are going to go out and, try and create a ashwagandha supplement by getting the plant and doing the whole thing, right? So we're all guilty of it. The question is that if the question is ease and the question is shortcut versus convenience, right? Like, where are we taking shortcuts in life? And it's understandable. Yeah, it is what it is. Point. You know what I mean? Like, good point. I know how to make a steak, and there's I'm going to have a protein shake. I'm going to have this. There's a lot of shortcuts if you also know how to get there the long way. So we're all influenced by it. We're all guilty of it, of taking shortcuts based on convenience that's been created through technology, through advancements in science. It's also extended our life expectancy. So again, it's 2 sides of the same coin. It's really about a person looking in the mirror and saying, what are the skills that I need to develop? Is this something that's really not going to affect my life all that much? Or is it really going to affect my life all that much if I know how to, go and grow ashwagandha? And it's probably not going to affect my life that much.
Right.
So the amount that I would need to invest to be able to do that skill probably isn't worth the return.
Right.
Compared to being able to take the shortcut by listening to experts that have taken the time and developed that skill to be able to get that to me in an easier way. The same way a parent might also outsource the teaching of their student, not saying their kid. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but they might say, I'm completely okay in giving that slight degree of authority based on the responsibility that I'm asking them to take. I want you to take the responsibility of creating a syllabus and a curriculum that will help educate my child. In return, I know that there's a certain amount of authority you have in wanting them to do certain things that you need them to get done. Because I'm not taking that responsibility. Any parent is not taking it. Could they do it? Absolutely, they could do it. But that's okay. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm not here to judge it.
Right.
It's just a fact. You've given that responsibility to a professional that may or may not have spent years of their life to be able to develop that curriculum and to be able to develop and say, here, this is the plan. And when we meet the teacher in the beginning of the year, they're going to show us, could you show me the curriculum? What does that look like? Oh, this is what it looks like. Oh, where are the rest days? Right? Hey, fitness professionals, I start using syllabus. This is our syllabus.
Right.
And you know what I mean? It's an interesting play on it. Like, all right, this semester, this is what we're going to do. We're going to develop this. This is our syllabus, and this is why we're going to do it. Because at the end of the day, you're going to have learned this much, right? We're going to have engineered this result by following this roadmap, by laying out this syllabus that we have. This is what we're going to learn along the way. Just an interesting way to think about it. But again, it goes back to how you started the conversation, which is boundaries, internal boundaries, which then we can start to push out.
Right.
Right. I think boundaries start internally, and then you can slowly start pushing them out to the external.
It also highlights to me standards.
Completely.
Is the standard of something. And when it comes to that teaching aspect, what are the standards that we should expect? And a lot of times, whether you're, early on the development stages or not, right? So towards being a master at your craft, what are the standards that we have as far as what we expect from those things that we outsource? If we're going to outsource something, we're going to hand over a little bit of that responsibility and authority. What standards do we respect or do we expect out of that source? And it might be a good starting point is looking at the standards, the expectation of the things that we're going to then give over our responsibility to.
And then what standards do we hold ourselves to first? Right? If we need to hold ourselves to a certain standard, and then maybe those that we have authority over, then we can expect the certain standard. But again, it's a lot easier to be able to have authority over others when you hold the same standard that you're expecting them to
100%
step up to, right? Right. There's always that old saying, Kobe, and they would never, ever expect anyone that they had a degree of authority over, they were the captain of the team, to do a workout that they weren't also doing. Right? So they had authority because they were the captain of the team. There's a certain degree of authority, of leadership, because they've taken the responsibility. And there's been a lot of professional athletes along the way that have never wanted that responsibility. There's a lot of professional athletes. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of professional athletes through the years that didn't want the responsibility of being the captain of the team.
100%.
Derek Jeter wanted to be the captain of the team, let's say. Right? But you could have someone like a Bernie Williams, right, who played for the Yankees. Great player, potential Hall of Famer if he's not already in the Hall of Fame. Does he have those leadership skills and the capabilities to be able to step up and say, I want to be the captain of the team? I don't think so. It's just not who he is. He didn't want that responsibility. So if he doesn't want that responsibility, can he have a degree of authority over his teammates? No.
It's interesting. It's almost like it's easier to implement a standard or influence a standard by being the standard.
And at the very least, being the standard or being higher than the standard, right? As a professional trainer, your standard is actually a little bit higher.
Yeah.
So you might set a standard. On that, yeah. And if you have this standard as far as your physical capabilities, your eating regimen, the regimen that you live by, you immediately within your clients, you wouldn't pull the standard up that high right away.
No.
You need to look at where they are, right?
Gradually increase it.
Right. I mean, anyone that's a founder of a company, they're up here with the responsibility they have, right? They're up here with they're the one that has to worry about, the IRS calling. They're the one that has to worry about payroll getting made. They're taking that responsibility. Everyone else below them doesn't have that responsibility, but they can set a certain standard to say this is where, what we expect while you're in this position. And then lastly is really just inspect what you expect.
Inspect what you expect.
If you're going to set standards, listen, no problem. There's a reason why, professors and teachers, they're going to have a conversation like, okay, cool, show me your homework. We're going to have a quiz. It's absolutely necessary, right? And again, I think it's, what degree of authority do you have over the situation, and who are you dealing with? But inspect what you expect. Any of the people that work in the professional world, there's not a single business owner here, or hotel owner, or warehouse owner that doesn't walk the floor. Right? It's that old saying, walk the floor, walk the floor. Right? They pick up a little piece of trash, walk the floor.
Yeah, something to that, that highlights, I'll just speak briefly, is the investment that you see when that happens. When they see the owner walking the floor. It's showing an investment that individual has into the organization, which then influences and inspires people to emulate at that standard of investment. So then they might start picking up, they might start operating a little differently. But it's almost more important to look at when that is not going on. Because a lot of times you just see the ownership doing things like that. And you're like, why do they don't need to do that? What are they doing that for? And those type of organizations are generally led better. They generally have more buy-in, more engagement. There's more of a respectful dynamic in the atmosphere. And it's probably because that person is showing you a standard of investment into whatever it is, a cause, an organization, for you to follow behind. But it starts with the person in that position influencing that standard.
And you know, biggest well, not the biggest, but you know, one of the differences between being a leader and being a boss.
Yeah.
Right? Leader versus boss.
Lead by example.
Lead by example. You know, leading from the
boss
front.
and command.
I think leading from the front is overused because it's too situational, right? But I think if you lead by example is the better way, like you just said, is the better way to frame it, instead of just lead from the front, lead from the front, lead from the front. It's not always that simple. Yeah, but I think if you lead by example, then you raise the standards, right? And if you raise the standard based on them seeing the work ethic you do, you don't always need to lead from the front. Because if you've built a strong enough team, you might not even be on the field, right? Just because you're the quarterback and you're the leader of that team doesn't mean you're going to be in every play, right? Like you got to let the defense do what the defense does.
Yes,
you're not on the field. So, you know, I think there's a metaphor there, and I think it's oversimplified when they say lead from the front. I think it's all situational, but I definitely think is lead with standards. And when you lead with standards, and those that raise to the occasion will, those that don't will naturally weed themselves out. And one piece of advice that a mentor of mine gave me is, you know, hire slow, fire fast. You know, and I think you can use that across a lot of different relationships in your life, whether it be someone that, especially if you're compensating someone, right? If you're investing in someone, but the same could be said about personal relationships, right? It's like, you know, whoever that person could be, your significant other. Slow, hire slow. But if it turns out that the person's character is not what you were expecting it to be, you got to move on quick. And that's why any company that I've worked for, the ones that I've resonated with the most are the ones that have a clear set, documented, advertised, and lived set of values that can say, these are our values. These are the values that we live by. And it's also a lot easier to weed out those that don't go along with that don't fit into the culture.
For sure.
Like, here are the values. Is something that they did or said, does it go 100% against any of those values? Then it's a very clear-cut answer. Our values don't align. I wish you the best. That's it. It's a very simple conversation. And easier said than done, right? But I think it's that muscle that ends up developing with work, with getting in the road and just saying, all right, are we going to stop here? There's a boulder. Am I just going to pull over? I got a flat tire, right? It's the same metaphor could be used as that, you know, how easy, you know, how as life gets better, it's getting easier. But, you know, how many people know how to change a flat tire? Or, you know, I mean, look, I'm not saying I can sit here and like change all my spark plugs and rebuild a motor. I can't do that.
Yeah.
And maybe that was pretty standard for a man, you know, 75 years ago. Okay. Right. So again, I'm not calling the kettle black. I'm not soapboxing anybody.
Right.
I'm just pointing at reality. And we all need to make those decisions and say to ourselves, okay, are we taking shortcuts to our character? That's when it gets difficult. And those are the hard mirror moments, to be able to say, am I taking shortcuts to my character that are not going to allow me to get to where I need to go? And am I finding the expertise? If I'm not rolling out, you know, my muscles before I'm working out my legs, am I actually not getting
full activation?
Or right. But if you don't engage with someone that has done that enough times and learned the lessons enough times to be able to say, if you do this, you'll have better results. Then disciplining the standards internally and the boundaries internally to say, like, hey, regardless of what's going on, when I got those earphones on and the hat is down, my boundary is that I need to get my workout in 50 minutes.
Right.
That's my boundary. I'm putting a boundary on people accessing me, nothing against that, but I'm putting a boundary on my time during that time because I know I